Hey YouTube, it's your history teacher, Mr. Terry, back with another History Teacher Reacts video. Today we are wrapping up Epic History TV's series on World War One. So this is the final video. It's on the year 1918, and what they've been doing, if you didn't know, is done a video on each of the years of the war. So I've been learning a ton. Hopefully I've been able to add a little commentary and kind of my thoughts as a teacher and how this kind of relates to that. But I'm really excited to wrap up what they've got here because they've done such a good job. And 1918 is a crazy year. The Americans are now really hitting the ground. The Russians, they're out. And again, it's the final year of the war. So lots going to be happening here. And I'm excited to bring this to a close. All right, the original video link is down below. Make sure you go over there and support them, give them a like, view, subscribe, all that stuff. Show them some love from our community because this is truly an awesome series that I will definitely be passing on to students and anyone looking, I think, to get the right balance of overview and depth, because I feel like these videos hit kind of right in that sweet spot in the middle, and as an educator that's really important to be able to find. So yeah, we'll get started here in just a second. Some links to some stuff down below if you are interested, things like Discord and some other fun things that you can get involved with the channel in. All right, but let's go ahead and get started then. Here it is. Final year. Not that they knew, but
1918. After 3.5 years of war, the Allies are in crisis. Russia has been rocked by revolution, and its new Bolshevik government has signed an armistice with the Central Powers.
Yep, they yeeted out of here.
Thousands of German troops will be freed up to fight on the Western Front, where the carnage of trench warfare has already claimed more than 1 million lives.
You got to remember how big of a thing this is that the Russians have left the war. The reason the Allies have even been able to stay into this conflict up to this point is the fact that the Central Powers have to fight on two fronts. And when you look at the big picture of things, it truly is impressive that the Central Powers were able to fight a stalemate for 4 years, having to split their troops up on multiple fronts. So when, of course, the Russians left, that was a huge boost for the Germans to be able to then redirect things over to the West. But as we know, and we saw this with the last video, and the year before, the Americans have declared war and are getting ready. They're getting ready to fight. So where the Russians leave, the Americans take place. But unfortunately for the Allies too, they don't have that advantage again of being able to like surround the Central Powers. But it also, there's pros and cons to being able to fight together as allies, but also be spread apart. So there's pros and cons to it. But nevertheless, it was a big thing, a huge thing for the Russians leaving.
But Germany is also desperate. Britain's long naval blockade has led to shortages and social unrest at home, while America's entry into the war brings fresh manpower and vast resources to the Allied cause. Germany faces inevitable defeat unless it can win a quick victory on the Western Front.
This is where we left last time too in 1917 was the Germans know that if they're going to win this now, especially with the Americans eventually coming here or starting to come, they have to do it now. They can't let the Americans come in here and get them entrenched and stuff. They need to win the war now. They've got the numbers per se, just because they've been able to redirect things from the east to the west. This is it. I think this is their biggest gamble of all, if you want to call it that. And I think they kind of understand that this is it. This is make or break for the entire war for them. Kaiser's Battle.
US President Wilson announces his 14 points. They outline his vision for a post-war world, including an end to secret treaties, a reduction in the size of armed forces, self-determination for the people of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Because, remember, well, I feel like we could spend all kinds of stuff on this, but remember what Wilson has always thought he could be, even before the Americans joined the war, is he thought he could be, as a powerful nation and a seemingly neutral one, that he could be an intermediary for this stuff. And of course, when the war ends, he's going to present these 14 points. And there's a lot of, I think, pretty common sense things that are trying to address the problems of World War I. Now, the famous thing, of course, with World War I is the war never really settles these issues long term, and it ends up being just a blame Germany and punish Germany thing without really, because to them they think peace in the future is punishing Germany, right? When there's so many other things going on, and you see a lot of these things. But yeah, some of them are interesting, like the self-determination for people of Austro-Hungarian Empire, because remember, when you roll the wheels back on all this, the spark of this thing was with issues in the multi-ethnic issue that Austria-Hungary has, that that led to the assassination of the Archduke down in Sarajevo. So if you look at these, and you definitely should look at these, look at them and you want to try to make connections between, are these causes of the war, right? And then what you got to do is compare it with what comes actually out of the Treaty of Versailles, and try to see which points make their way in there. And a conversation that you could have is, if more of this stuff had gone in, could that have prevented a World War II or something? And why maybe were some things put in the treaty that weren't on this list, or vice versa?
And an international organization to settle future disputes.
League of Nations.
But most European leaders dismiss his ideas as wishful thinking.
I don't think I get to it, but I want to make. I think this is such an amazing point, that one of the things that does come in the eventual Treaty of Versailles is the League of Nations, which was the last point there. But fascinatingly, America never joins the League of Nations. Wilson was supportive of it. Congress was not. What they thought was that the League of Nations could basically bypass one of Congress's most important constitutional rights, which is declarations of war, and that being a part of the League of Nations would just get America involved in future European conflicts again. And there's kind of a point to that, because World War I is going to leave a bad taste in Americans' mouth too. It just kind of further cement their idea that Europe is this mess that the Americans should try to stay out of and then deal with their own issues. But yeah, I always thought that was interesting. The Americans, in a way, and when we're talking about Americans, we're really talking about Wilson, proposes the League of Nations, but never gets the support to actually, and we never get the support as American Congress never gets the support to actually join it. And that's another thing too. If America was able to join the League of Nations, would that have had any bearing on the outcome or the outbreak of a World War II, or was that just overstating American influence?
At Brest-Litovsk,
What do you think? Put it in the comments.
Bolshevik Russia signs a peace treaty with the Central Powers.
Russia
gives up vast amounts of territory in exchange for peace.
I mean, this is the most important stuff. I mean, when you look at Russia, when Russia was empire building with people like Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, this stuff that they just gave was the whole point of their empire. Control part of the Black Sea, which they still kind of do a part of that, but that region, and then losing a ton of the territory they had in the Baltic area. So, I mean, this is a huge loss for the Russians when it comes to this. But so the Germans kind of make out, I think, pretty well with this.
500,000 German troops can now be redeployed from the east to the Western Front.
Last thing the Allies
where
want.
German General Erich Ludendorff plans an all-out, last-ditch offensive to win the war.
Here it is.
Ludendorff's spring offensive catches the Allies off guard. German stormtroopers, using new infiltration tactics, help to overwhelm the British Fifth Army, which is soon in full retreat. The German advance threatens to split the British and French armies, with disastrous consequences. So French General Ferdinand Foch is appointed Supreme Commander of Allied forces to coordinate strategy. Outside Amiens, British and Australian troops improvise a defence and finally halt the German advance. The German offensive switches to the north, targeting the Channel ports. But the British inflict heavy losses on the Germans and prevent a breakthrough.
It seems like what they just said. It's like they push and then they're unable to get a breakthrough. That's just like, if you look at just the outcome of all battles in World War, or 90% of battles in World War I is, they try to make a push, huge casualties, nothing is gained. Next battle, same thing, go down a whole list. Air power. Air's war is changing. Big time.
Above the trenches, the First Air War continues to escalate. Each side now has more than 3,000 aircraft in service on the Western Front. But by 1918, the Allies have won air superiority.
Remember, the first use of air warfare in 1914, in most of the war itself, was, remember, reconnaissance, being able to photograph and map out enemy trench positions. But it's only a matter of time, of course, before both start using planes, and then they're fighting for that air superiority. So you go into the creation of fighter planes. Remember, in World War I, you don't have, like in World War II, the big, huge bombers and stuff like that. It's a very different type of air war than you're going to see in future battles. But it's the birth of a brand new technology. Flight has only been around. I mean, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, with the Wright brothers, that's like 10 years before the war started, and that was them going for a few seconds on a beach. I've said this before in videos, but the technology of air, just airplanes in general, flight, is one of the most impressive progressions we've ever seen of any technology, because within one generation, within 60 years, basically 60 years, you get the Kitty Hawk stuff to flying to the moon and back. Like, it truly is an incredible progression in technology.
Thanks to greater resources. On the 21st of April, Germany's most famous pilot, Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, is shot down and killed near Amiens. With 80 victories, he's the war's highest-scoring ace, and is buried by the Allies with full military honours. Britain's new independent bombing force launches a daylight raid against Cologne. It marks the beginning of Britain's own strategic bombing campaign. On the ground, Ludendorff's offensive switches south, targeting the French. German troops advance 30 miles, but are halted at the River Marne, just as fresh American divisions enter the line.
Remember the Marne, you look at this too, it's kind of where the first battle started. The Marne, as you can see over here, if you can see my mouse, you got the river, and yeah, some of this region, this area right here, is one of the last geographic barriers protecting Paris. And the French had to put every single life possible to hold that to the death. Otherwise, you lose Paris. If you lose Paris, I mean, you lose the whole thing. So this was such an important place to hold down, and had been ever since the first battles of the war.
The US 1st Division is the first to see combat at the Battle of Cantigny. 3 days later, the US 2nd Division wins victory at the Battle of Belleau Wood.
Yep. First big one.
By now, the
Americans kind of showed, at least in this, that they could fight. You know, they were inexperienced, of course, heavily drafted army because they needed troops so fast. I think there were only like 100,000 standing. I think when the war or declaration happens, they're able to raise something like 2 million soldiers in a year, which is pretty impressive. But nevertheless, a non-professional army.
Nearly a million
for the most
American soldiers in France, with 10,000 more arriving every day. The fourth phase of the German offensive leads to a 9-mile advance, but is finally halted by a French counterattack. In Italy, Austria-Hungary launches an attack at Asiago and the Piave River to support Ludendorff's offensive in France.
So Germany's basically alone to fight three nations.
But it's repulsed with heavy losses, and morale amongst the Austro-Hungarian army collapses.
We don't want to do this anymore.
British and French troops land at Murmansk in northern Russia. It's the beginning of Allied intervention in Russia's civil war, on the side of so-called white or anti-Bolshevik forces. On the Western Front, the Germans' final attack is defeated in the Second Battle of the Marne. Ludendorff's offensive has cost the Germans more than 600,000 casualties and has failed to make a decisive breakthrough. Germany's final gamble has failed.
That's so many. Remember, list up all the gambles that the Germans took in this war, right? First, Russia would take a way longer to mobilize than they did. Didn't work. Britain wouldn't necessarily join the war if Germany invaded Belgium. Didn't work, right? try to have a backup plan for America by the Zimmerman telegram, right? The proposed potential alliance between Germany and Mexico failed, right? The big offensive here at the end failed. Again, the only one I really talk about, and I had a few people message or comment down there that I'd commented on it, but yeah, surprisingly not surprisingly, it just can't go into too much detail, but the whole idea that one thing the Germans did gamble correctly on was getting Lenin, who had been exiled out of Russia, and get him armed and supported to go ahead and conduct this revolution, right? So to go and start this revolution from within. So that was the only one that really worked, but too many bad gambles.
The Allies now go on the attack. At the Battle of Amiens, British, Australian, Canadian and French troops, supported by tanks and aircraft, advanced 7 miles in a single day. General Ludendorff calls the 8th of August the Black Day of the German army.
I mean, it's over. I mean, it's
German
over.
troops are exhausted, hungry and demoralized, and begin to surrender in their thousands.
Yeah, it's over.
The Battle of Amiens begins the Allies' 100 Days offensive. Trench warfare
Beginning
is
of the
over.
end.
The Germans are in full retreat.
Yeah. Germans have never had to do this, some kind of retreat like this, on all parts of the Western Front. I mean, it looks like it's only inevitable that they're going to get to the German border, and luckily for the Germans, they've not had to do really any fighting on their border. So that is going to bring up a question here soon as they see these lines getting pushed, right? How willing are the Germans to continue this war in their nation, on their home soil?
In the Balkans, a new Allied offensive at Dobropolye breaks through Bulgarian positions. The overstretched Bulgarian army collapses, and 2 weeks later, Bulgaria signs an armistice. In the Middle East, British-led forces defeat the Turks at the Battle of Megiddo, taking 25,000 prisoners. Allied troops soon occupy Damascus and Aleppo.
Central Powers losing on all fronts.
On the Western Front, Marshal Foch orders a general attack. British, French and American armies reach the Hindenburg Line, a line of reinforced German defences, and break through.
That's it. It's happening.
Ludendorff informs the Kaiser that the military situation is hopeless and that Germany must seek an armistice. Germany sends a request to US President Woodrow Wilson, who in return demands German withdrawal from all occupied territory.
Tell your
And
friends
the Kaiser's abdication.
we're done. You don't hate us
On
as
the
much as they
Italian
do.
front, the Allies deliver the final blow to Austria-Hungary at the Battle of Vittorio Veneto. The Austro-Hungarian army disintegrates, and 300,000
Wow.
prisoners are taken.
This is the first battle we've seen here in the European theater where you've had this lopsided of a casualty count.
With the Central Powers facing collapse, the Ottoman Empire signs an armistice with the Allies at Mudros. 4 days later, Austria-Hungary signs an armistice with the Allies at Villa Giusti. At Kiel, the German High Seas Fleet is ordered to make a suicidal attack on the British Navy, but instead it mutinies.
Yeah, why would
Revolution.
they? If they really think they've got the morale and to the death commitment from Germany, it shows how disconnected military command is from their people. Shoot, maybe you could get away with this stuff in 1914 or 1950, not in 1918. No.
Spreads through Germany. The Kaiser abdicates, and a German
Hi,
republic
Wilhelm.
is proclaimed. On the 11th of November 1918, a German delegation signs an armistice with the Allies inside Marshal Foch's railway carriage at Compiègne.
Fun fact, not fun. See that rail car, right? The French will preserve this rail car as it's a piece of history. It's where the Germans signed their armistice. Interestingly, when in World War II, when Adolf Hitler and the Germans take over Paris, take over France, they forced the French to sign their surrender, essentially, in the same cart. Yeah.
It comes into force at
Big
11
flex
a.m.
there, huh?
But fighting continues until the last moment. American Private Henry Gunter is killed, charging a German machine gun at 10:59. He is thought to be the last
one, yeah,
soldier
'cause it's
killed
11 a.m.
during
it's
World
start-
War I.
The big famous thing you can remember. Man, I didn't know who the specific person was, but I always had kind of talked with my students about that. Like, man, how bad would it suck to be the last person who dies in the war? Because we talk about how it was famous that, and it makes it kind of easy to remember. The armistice to end the war ends on the 11th month, November, 11th day, November 11th, and at 11 a.m. So 11/11/11. And yeah, we always said, man, how bad would that suck to be the one that dies at 10:59, you know?
3 days later, in East Africa, German General von Lettow-Vorbeck surrenders his army on the Chambezi River. For 4 years, he has tied down huge numbers of Allied troops, remaining undefeated while cut off from home. He is still considered one of history's greatest guerrilla leaders.
I mean, doing all that on his own is impressive. It's not a peace, it is an armistice for 20 years. Not wrong. You're going to get one of these
The
coming
Paris
up soon.
Peace Conference opens at the Palace of Versailles, just outside the French capital. Delegates accept a proposal to create a League of Nations to settle
Clemenceau.
future international disputes.
David Lloyd George.
The Versailles Treaty, signed in June, imposes harsh terms on Germany. Its military is restricted in size. It must pay war
Yeah, the size they're allowed to have. They used to have, what is it? Like, they used to have, 4.5 million or something in their army, reduced to 100,000. No more Air Force, no more tanks, basically no Navy. They basically stripped them of everything that, of course, nationalists in Germany will use against the Allies, and saying that stripped away the pride of Germany, which had long been in their military.
reparations to the Allies.
Billions, was it 33 billion or whatever, and it translates to much more than that these days. A debt that Germany can't afford because their economy will be completely ruined. And interestingly, Germany didn't finish off paying that debt till about 10 years ago. Amazing.
It loses territory to its neighbours,
Hundreds of miles of stuff.
and its colonies are seized by the victors. Germany must also accept responsibility for the war in a
That's the
war
interesting
guilt
one.
clause, a source of lasting resentment in Germany.
This is such an interesting thing, and maybe one of the, although it seems like it'd be kind of harmless, because what they're doing here is Germany, when they sign this, have to accept that they are the full blame for the war. It seems like it'd be harmless. There's no outcome to it, but morally, it's big, right? Because when you go to look at the causes of the war, I think after you have the whole discussion about the long-term causes and short-term the causes, right when you're having a discussion, right when those things are happening, I don't think anybody would say Germany is 100% to blame for this war breaking out. There's a lot of things to look at, and people generally believe that there's a lot of blame to be shared around. So what this clause does, Article 231, is, I think, it rewrites the history of this war. And anytime you do that, bad things can happen, right? It's a victor's treaty, and they are dictating the history of this. And this history and rewriting of history is something that's going to, of course, invigorate the Germans. and the Nazi Party later on and stuff like that, as showing how they think criminal the Allies were and how they handled this and what they forced upon Germany.
The boundaries of Europe are redrawn.
Big time.
Poland re-emerges after 100 years of foreign rule.
I mean, when you looked at, going back to the map real quick,
The boundaries of Europe.
when you look at the original map of what Europe was like before the war broke out, this map in no way represents the cultural boundaries of Europe. Europe is so much more culturally, ethnically, racially diverse, you could say, than these maps show. Because why these are Hungary or the like Austria-Hungary, Germany, Russia. These are empires. These are multinational empires within Europe, and we know that can cause a lot of problems, right? Like it did with Bosnians down here in Austria-Hungary, which wanted independence, where a lot of this, of course, starts. And what you do get with the map redrawn is not necessarily a purely accurate cultural borders of Europe, but something that is far more realistic.
Europe are redrawn.
But not perfect by any means.
Poland re-emerges
Because-
after 100 years of foreign rule.
This map, when you look at it today and they're about to make it out, is not the map today in Europe. There are more changes happening.
While Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia,
Czechoslovakia doesn't exist
and
anymore.
an enlarged
Yugoslavia doesn't
Romania
exist anymore.
emerged from the ashes of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Ottoman Empire is dismantled. New states, most under European control, are created in the Middle East.
And that's a story for another
Here,
time.
as
but
in
yeah.
Europe, the seeds of future conflict are sown.
The way the Europeans drew up these borders made no cultural sense whatsoever. They just threw out something and divided things, did not take into account any kind of cultural divisions, which is going to, from really the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Middle East is going to be a wreck.
While in the Far East, former German possessions in China are handed to Japan.
This is what
China's
why Japan
outrage.
wanted him. Remember, Japan's trying to create an empire at this time too. That's why they got involved. Partly.
World War I claimed the lives of 9.5 million soldiers. 1 in 8 of those who fought.
1 in
21
8.
million more were wounded. 7 million civilians also lost their lives. Huge areas of Europe were left devastated. Old empires vanished. New states were born. Lives across the world were transformed. The world was never the same again.
It's true.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like it
And I did.
and subscribe to the channel.
Look at these
And
other
find
videos.
out how
These
you
are
can
awesome.
help us make more videos at
Russia
our Patreon
video.
page.
Cool. Blackbeard. Nice. Waterloo. All the Napoleon fans can squeal. Let's let these credits roll. What a great production by these folks. Great production. Okay, yeah, this was awesome. I really like the mini series type videos like this that are 5 episodes or something. One reason why I like Extra Histories, they kind of do this format. And again, I like how I think it kind of hits a specific topic in that sweet zone of not being too overbearing, but also giving you good detail. And I thought this was good. Best one I've seen on World War One, little like a mini series of this style. I think that I've seen. So I really do enjoy it. Thanks to everyone that had recommended this to me. People have been recommending this to me for over a year. I think that my channel has now been up, and I really appreciate it. I think there's definitely I know I'll be able to take a lot of things into my class to be able to talk about and get more discussions going. But hopefully you heard, and can remember some of those discussion points I say that I bring up in my classes, that you can have with others and have meaningful discussions about World War I, things about the causes and the effects and the decisions, throughout the war. And now that you can look at it in 2020 hindsight, a little bit different. But we, of course, know that, this war is not going to be the war to end all wars, which is what people were thinking it could be. Will be the war to change all wars, and will be a war that truly changed the planet forever. But yeah, amazing that with that, and that requires a whole other discussion about the treaty. They really didn't talk. They hit some of the basic stuff of the treaty, but to look into more of that, and you can make a prediction here, although we know what happens with World War II, but could this actually have been really the war to sort of end all wars? We've had these casualties that had never before even been touched before in history, and new technologies make people be scared into avoiding wars and trying to solve problems to avoid those. And of course, the wrong thing was, like that quote said, is all they're doing here is creating a 20-year armistice, which is almost exactly what happens before you get something much bigger on a much bigger scale, like Stalin having to chase down Adolf Hitler back to Berlin in their Mario Kart vehicles. By the way, this shirt is still on sale on the Teespring if you're interested in some history gear. Anyway, awesome. I love doing this. And as we get ready to, if you're watching this when I put it out, a lot of us are getting ready to go back to school. And hopefully throughout the summer and through the channel thus far, depending on when you've seen this, you can take a lot of these ideas and make meaningful discussions in your classrooms, or whether it's just in your homes with your friends, all that kind of stuff. I think it's important that we're always having these discussions, because there's a lot to be had and a lot to still be determined that we can learn out of history. So with that, thanks again for joining me, and link down below. Make sure you give this video view time, subscription, like, all that stuff. They have a Patreon account. Definitely, if you have to choose between pledging to my channel or their channel, do that for sure, because they are very, very deserving. All right, links to other stuff down below. Join our Discord community for more meaningful discussions on the internet here. And with that, we'll see you guys next time. Bye.